Hey, how's it going, everyone? My name is Spencer Smith, and thanks for tuning back into my channel. Today, I just wanted to make a short video to talk about a couple of topics. I have a couple of theological things that I want to talk about, and also I wanted to let you guys know that I have scheduled and confirmed an in-person interview with Dr. John Oswalt, who is the author of a two-part commentary. I only have the one part of the book of Isaiah for the New International Commentary on the Old Testament. He is the Isaiah scholar. If anyone wants to know anything about Isaiah, many people go to him. He is actually one of the believing scholars who actually believe that Isaiah was the author of the whole book. Because a lot of people want to say, well, it's Deutero-Isaiah or three authors. And, liberals like to tell stories. And it's kind of funny if you really think about it, because they always accuse us for believing fairy tales. But whenever you hear them talk about Daniel and Isaiah, and they make up all of these alleged stories or alleged theories, it's kind of funny how they believe them. But nonetheless, I'm very excited to interview Dr. John Oswalt. He is a distinguished professor of Old Testament here at Asbury Theological Seminary, which is directly up the road from me, not that far away, about a 5-minute walk from me. So it's going to be very intriguing and exciting to be able to sit down with him and to pick his brain about eschatology and Isaiah, and how Isaiah the prophet applies to us. He has a very, very helpful teaching series on Isaiah on YouTube, and it's very practical and it's very easy to apply to your life. That's what I really appreciate about Dr. John Oswalt. His teaching is very practical and it's very helpful to apply to your life. He is an excellent teacher. He is an exceptional author and just a really good man of God all around. So looking forward to that. And I just want to let you guys know that if you're interested in submitting some questions for Dr. John Oswalt, I would be happy to sift through them. If you want to comment them on this video, or you can email me. My contact is in the description on this on my YouTube channel, so you can email me some questions, or you can comment them down. Just make sure you specify that it's for a question for Dr. John Oswalt, so I can get them printed out and kind of organized for him. But with that said, I just want to talk to you guys a little bit about some theological things that I've been thinking about, and I plan on doing future videos on this issue as well. But I've been kind of reviewing, and I've read a lot of this, and I'm kind of rereading this again, A House for My Name by Peter Leithart, Dr. Peter Leithart. And this is an excellent book if you want to have a good resource on the Old Testament and you want to just kind of know more about God's word, especially in the Old Testament, and especially from a preterist perspective. You can't really beat Peter Leithart. Peter Leithart is an excellent author, as well as James B. Jordan. His Through New Eyes changed everything for me, and also his commentaries. So I just wanted to speak a little bit about the Abrahamic Covenant and the Old Testament and the hope for the Gentiles. So this is something that's very interesting to talk about, because when you read the Bible, sometimes it gets kind of hyper-focused on Israel, and that's fine. It is true. The covenants were given to Israel. The law was given to Israel, and that's true. No question about it. But I think a lot of people don't understand how Gentiles were actually a part of this from the outset. And this is something that I really appreciate from Peter Leithart in his Old Testament survey. He is kind of going over here at the outset. When I was rereading this, I was looking at this again and thinking about how much this actually helped me in my early studies, especially in preterism. He is talking about R. Kendall Solon, who wrote the book, The God of Israel in Christian Theology. And R. Kendall Solon kind of specifies and emphasizes a lot that the backbone of the covenantal arrangement of Israel was physical descent from Abraham. And Dr. Leithart critiques that, and he says, actually, it's not. It's not the backbone of Israel and the covenant with Israel. And that's something that changed my life completely, because when you think about it, there's a lot of physical descent, and that is a part of it. There's no question about it. That is a part of it. But I think this is something that might kind of help you understand further what God's intent was from the very beginning. Because if you really read the Bible from the beginning and you understand how God views the nations, especially from the flood, You have Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and from the descendants of them, they have 70 nations that are listed in Genesis 10. And then you have the Tower of Babel, where all the nations are united. And then God comes down and he scatters the nations. And then out of all the 70 nations that are listed in Genesis 10, God chooses one man. This is why the call of Abraham is directly after the Tower of Babel. Just before the Tower of Babel, the list of 70 nations is listed. And then the Tower of Babel happens. And then God scatters the nations. And then directly after that, God calls Abraham. And he says, in you, Abraham, and in your seed, all these nations that I just mentioned 2 chapters before are going to be blessed. So I wanted to speak about this for a little bit because this is very interesting. Right from the beginning, this is what Dr. Lightheart says in his book at the opening. He says, quote, right from the beginning of the covenant embraced many who were not in any way related to Abraham by blood. All the male members of Abraham's household were circumcised. Genesis 17, 12 through 14. And of course, he's mentioning the circumcision covenant. And here I have it pulled up here, and I'm going to read it for you guys right here. Genesis 17, 11 says this, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be as a sign of the covenant between me and you. And every male among you who is 8 days old shall be circumcised throughout your generations. One who is born in your house, or of one who is bought with money from any foreigner, who is not of your seed, note that, not a physical descendant, a servant who is born in your house, or who is bought with your money, shall surely be circumcised. Thus shall my covenant be in your flesh. And he's speaking to Abraham. So this is the circumcision covenant. So this is something that Dr. Lightheart points out. And he says, and I quote, and in his household, that included, he's speaking of Abraham's household, that included 318 fighting men. Genesis 14:14. Now we remember the slaughter of the kings. Lot was captured, and Abraham liberates him. And he has 318 fighting men born in his house. Abraham has 318 fighting men. Now note this. These are not physical descendants of Abraham. Abraham actually adopted these people into his household. That's why he says, my only descendant, my only person who can inherit is Eliezer of Damascus. This is not a physical descendant. These are people who were adopted into his household and they were able to inherit. That's also mentioned in the law of Moses as well. You had slaves who were able to inherit. But this is very interesting. So let's just assume for a minute that these 318 fighting men in Abraham's household were not Roman Catholic priests and they weren't celibate. Let's just imagine for a moment that they weren't Roman Catholics. Let's say, I don't know, let's just speculate. Maybe these 318 fighting men, the course of nature and everything, maybe they had wives and maybe they had sons as well. Now you're talking about a lot of people in Abraham's household. You're talking about Abraham is a wealthy man who has a lot of people in his household that aren't physical descendants. Let's see what Dr. Lightheart goes on. He goes on, and I quote, this must have been a sizable number of men, far more than the blood descendants of Abraham, who at that time included only Ishmael. So what he is saying is, when the circumcision covenant began in Genesis 17, Yahweh said, Abraham, circumcise all of the men who is in your house, 8 days old and over. So we already know in Genesis 14, Abraham had 318 fighting men. And again, let's assume that they had children, sons. Let's assume that. That means Abraham had to circumcise, and all of his household were circumcised. And at that time, the only physical descendant was Ishmael. So you're looking at about 318 versus 1. One physical descendant versus 318 non-physical descendants. So there goes the whole idea of this physical descent only of being the backbone of the Abrahamic Covenant. It blows it right out the water from the outset. This shows that God's covenant cuts deeper than blood. it was never really focused on that idea. Abraham's call was through his seed, which we know from Galatians is Christ, was to bless all those nations that were listed just 2 chapters before and from before his call in Genesis 10. So this is something that we need to think about. Abraham adopted the nations into his household, and he brought them in covenant to Yahweh through circumcision, of course. Of course, in the new covenant, we no longer practice that. But the point is this is something that Abraham did. He loved the nations. He adopted the nations into his house. And in fact, he interceded for the nations. We know this from Genesis 19 and 18 and 19, when he intercedes for Sodom and Gomorrah, and he whittles God down all the way down to 10 and 1, yada, yada, yada. He goes through the motions of whittling God down, and he's interceding for Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is why I believe Jesus critiques and he scolds the Jews of his day, the apostates of his day. And he says, if Abraham were your father, you would do the works of Abraham. And what did Abraham do? He adopted the nations into his household. He was a light to the nations. He brought them in covenant with Yahweh. He interceded for the nations. This is exactly what Israel failed to do. They were to be a light to the nations. Look at Deuteronomy 4. Their law and their witness was to be a light to the nations. And the nations were to look at Israel and say, boy, what great nation is this who has a God so near to it? I want to be close to a people like this. I want to join myself to a people like this. I want to worship Yahweh because these people are blessed. These people are different. And not only that, but of course in Genesis 14, we know that Melchizedek, priest of Most High El Elyon, Yahweh, he is the priest of the Most High Yahweh, Melchizedek. Priest of Most High Yahweh, and he's hanging out with the king of Sodom. You know, this is before Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction, of course, in Genesis 14. But just think about that for a moment. Melchizedek, priest of Most High El Elyon, of Yahweh. He's a priest of Yahweh, but he's not a physical descendant of Abraham. So wait a minute. There were priests to Yahweh before the physical line. Let me ask you, what did this priest of Most High Yahweh do? Well, I'd assure you he interceded and he called to worship for the people. And who were those people but the nations? God's eyes have always been on the nations. It was always about the nations. Israel was a means to bring about salvation for the nations. That's why we cannot lose our focus on Abraham's call. Abraham's call was for the nations to be blessed. You can't lose it. And at the outset of this covenant, the physical descent was one Ishmael, and the Gentiles, let's just say 318, but we know that they probably had sons. So you're looking at more like 400 or so, maybe more. We don't know, but at least it was 318 fighting men who were circumcised along one physical descent. So 318 versus 1. Covenant cuts deeper than blood. Anyways, this is a short video that I wanted to talk about. But yeah, please pick up this book, A House for My Name. I mean, this book has blessed me in so many ways. Very, very helpful, especially the ties to Christ. You would not know how many parallels there are to Jesus Christ, especially all throughout the Old Testament. Jesus wasn't lying when he said, if you believed Moses in John 5, you would believe me, for Moses wrote about me. So he says Moses accuses you. So you need to pick up that book. And please don't forget, like, comment, and subscribe. And also do not forget to leave a question for Dr. John Oswalt for that upcoming interview. Please try to get them into me before June 20th if you can, because the interview is going to be at the end of June. And yes, so God bless you all. And I hope you guys like this. Like I said, like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll catch you on the next one. God bless.